The survival of Britain as a free, democratic, self-governing sovereign state is again under threat. This time it comes from a European elite that is determined to destroy the nations of Europe and replace them with a centralized corporate superstate, the United States of Europe. This would impose a written constitution on Britain, and we would be forced to surrender major and vital powers to Brussels. We would no longer be able to run our own economy, nor defend ourselves without the EU's say-so. Control of our own foreign affairs and social policies would pass to Brussels as well. The European Union would take for itself the right to interfere in every nook and cranny of our national life, even more than it does already. If we are to retain the ability to govern ourselves through a parliament and government which we not only elect but can also dismiss, then the British people must fight this attempt to take over our country completely. We won the Battle of Britain in 1940. We now have a new battle on our hands, just as real and just as dangerous. This is the battle for Britain. The film you are about to see explains the facts and why it is vital for you to join in this battle. Your country needs you, now.
In the summer of 2004, Britain, as an independent country, will disappear, and the British, as a self-governing free people, will cease to exist. Is that what we want? In 1972, Edward Heath signed the Treaty of Rome and took Britain into the common market. The way in which that event was presented to the British people established a pattern of political deceit that has been maintained to this day. The 1971 Foreign and Commonwealth Office document entitled Sovereignty in the European Communities warned that joining the common market meant essential aspects of sovereignty would increasingly be transferred to the community itself. But nobody told the British people. Throughout its closely typed pages, the document emphasises time and time again that loss of sovereignty will increase as the community develops. But nobody told the British people. Sovereignty means the freedom of a people to govern themselves and be independent of outside control. The 1971 document warned that the British would lose that freedom and ultimately be governed from Brussels. But nobody told the British people. The 1971 document was to be suppressed for 30 years. Sir Crispin Tickell, one of Heath's negotiators, admitted in 2001 that in respect of the loss of sovereignty issues, it was decided the less they came out in the open, the better. This despite a 1972 briefing from the Law Lords during which Lord Wilberforce told Heath that the Treaty of Rome and subsequent European law meant a total loss of sovereignty. And how did Edward Heath deal with this momentous constitutional change? Quite simply, he said it wasn't happening. In a white paper to Parliament and the accompanying pamphlet, he wrote, "There is no question of Britain losing essential national sovereignty." An intentionally misleading impression was fostered of a trading agreement, a level playing field with continental Europe. The fact that Britain was being signed up to an economic and political structure that would eventually mean the destruction of our national parliament was deliberately concealed. In 1975, the Labour Prime Minister Harold Wilson held a referendum on whether Britain should remain in the common market. Prior to the referendum, Wilson produced a pamphlet in which he identified the possibility of a single currency and promised, "This threat has been removed." Like Heath before him, Wilson deceived us. He knew that by signing the Treaty of Rome and other written assurances our politicians had already given, Britain had been committed to membership of the euro. Wilson also wrote, "The minister representing Britain can veto any proposal for a new law or new tax if he considers it to be against British interests." Another lie. A passage in the 1971 document points out that decisions would either require majority voting or consensus. Conservative, Labour and Liberal Democrat politicians have systematically deceived us all about the European Union. The method they employ is simple. Whenever a potentially significant EU policy is imminent, they first deny that it will happen. They later admit that it will happen, but it won't apply to Britain. Later still, they admit it does apply to Britain, but that it's not important. Eventually, they admit that it is important, but now it's inevitable anyway. That 1971 document offered further advice on how best to hide what was happening. Her Majesty's government and all political parties, it advised, should not exacerbate public concern by attributing unpopular measures or unfavourable economic developments to the remote and unmanageable workings of the community. In other words, the growing influence of Brussels must be hidden and EU policies presented as homegrown national initiatives. This duplicity continues to this day. Here are just a few examples. Our own government has been encouraging a switch from analogue to digital TV. It has hidden the fact that this hugely expensive changeover is an EU-wide plan to free up analogue frequencies so that they can be sold. The government's insistence on the involvement of private funding to run the London Tube service is to keep within the public borrowing limits of the European Union's Stability and Growth Pact. The changes to the Royal Mail, apparently being made under UK legislation, are in reality in compliance with the EU Directive 9767, opening up postal services to increased competition and in anticipation of further EU measures. 50,000 British postal jobs are now threatened and rural post offices are closing. Virtually every change in our lives is due to laws from Brussels, but our own politicians continue to hide this from us. Perhaps the most cynical misrepresentation of EU policy is the so-called devolution process. In May 2002, John Prescott announced his 30-year dream of 8 devolved English governmental regions, in line with the alleged devolution in Scotland, Northern Ireland, Wales and London. A number of conventions had been established to monitor and organise possible public demand for such a change. No mention was made, either by Prescott or the conventions, that these changes were anything to do with the European Union. In fact, when challenged, members of the conventions vehemently denied any EU involvement. They too lied. Here are the facts. You decide. In 1992, the Maastricht Treaty established the Committee of the Regions in Brussels, at which 2 representatives from each of the regions in the EU, including those from Britain, began regularly to meet. In 1996, the EU published brochures on the regions. This one, for the South West, refers to it as the South West, a region of the European Union. The word England does not appear. Later in the brochure, Scotland, Wales, London and Northern Ireland are shown as 4 of the 12 regions in the UK. This map, printed by the EU in 1997, shows the countries of the European Union, including Britain, divided up into regions. Again, the word England does not appear on this map. Published in 2000, this document from the South West Regional Planning Guidance illustrates how the counties of the South West will be replaced by new sub-regional boundaries. In May 2001, the Committee of the Regions in Brussels issued this document showing the development of the regions within the EU structure. On the 26th of June 2001, this EU document defined the way the new regional structures will be classified into sub-regions and smaller regions. The familiar 1,000-year-old county structures, unique to these islands, will disappear. The new map of Britain will look like this. In each of the 8 intended regions in England, 3 EU governmental structures have been set up. They are the Regional Government Office, the Regional Development Agency, and the Regional Chamber. The members of these 3 structures are all political appointees. 2 members from each of the regional chambers regularly attend at the Committee of the Regions in Brussels. The Regional Development Agency allocates funding from Brussels to the regions. On the 16th of March 2001, Dr. Caroline Jackson MEP was asked publicly whether regional chambers would eventually mean the Westminster Parliament being abolished. She replied, yes. In September 2000, Austin Mitchell MP admitted that these changes would get little, if any, public support, and so made another familiar suggestion. There is no way, he said, we will win a referendum on regional government, so we will have to find another way. I leave you to decide whether we are watching the bringing of democracy closer to the people or the dismantling of a nation-state and its parliament. This is the EU governmental structure that now controls our country. A brief word about each of the 6 components. The presidency is held by each of the nation-states for 6 months on a rotating basis. It is purely symbolic. The European Council is the first of the three forums that now govern us. It is attended by, amongst others, the leaders of the nation-states and their foreign ministers. The Council is extremely powerful, and its decisions affect us all. It meets 4 times a year. Its deliberations are secret and seldom published, and then only after they've been implemented. The Council of Ministers consists of one representative at ministerial level from each member country. The minister with the portfolio for the topic being considered, such as farming, education, law and order, etc., will attend. The extensive powers of the Council are directed towards the development of a European state. Britain is unable to prevent damaging legislation, as most decisions in the Council are now decided by qualified majority voting. The President of the EU Commission is currently Romano Prodi. This post has enormous influence, but it is a political appointment decided behind closed doors. The Commission is made up of 20 commissioners. Britain has 2, Neil Kinnock and Chris Patton. They also are political appointees in post for 5 years. The Commission is responsible for virtually all the EU laws that now govern us. The 1971 document forecast that by joining the EEC, we shall be accepting an external legislative, having direct powers of legislating within the UK, adding, community law is required to take precedence over domestic law. The British public wasn't told that back in 1971. And neither was it told this. Most EU law is now by way of regulation, which prohibits any involvement by Westminster other than implementation. Again, that 1971 document warned, in the case of regulation, there is no room for parliamentary action. Parliament must take the regulation as it stands. Some 80% of all the legislation going through the Westminster Parliament today is merely the rubber stamping of EU regulations. Approve or not, Westminster has no choice but to implement regulations, whatever the cost or however impractical. A classic example of this is the ozone-depleting substances regulation, prohibiting the return of old refrigerators and freezers to retailers, classifying them as hazardous waste. Local authorities are now required to process them in specially licensed plants that don't exist in the UK. Fridge mountains are appearing all over Britain, and the fly tipping of old machines has become commonplace. Westminster is powerless to prevent any of this. Britain currently has 87 of the 626 MEPs sitting in the European Parliament. This is not a parliament as we in Britain know it. It cannot create laws or raise taxes and is virtually powerless. It is merely a talking shop and exists to give the impression of democracy to the electorates of the EU. Regulations from the Commission must be ratified by the European Parliament before becoming community law, but the Parliament has little authority to prevent them. All regulations eventually go through. Under this system, many thousands of laws have been made affecting every aspect of our lives. Here are just a few recent examples. Compliance with EU Directive 911440 has resulted in the present disastrous state of our railways. Britain is the only EU country to fully implement this directive. It is reckoned that the End-of-Life Vehicles Directive from Brussels will lead to the demise of car production in the UK, the loss of thousands of jobs, and increased dumping of old vehicles. Even more jobs will go when most of Britain's health shops close due to the imposition of the Herbal Medicines Products Directive that outlaws thousands of perfectly safe herbal remedies. Britain, with millions of its citizens using alternative medicines, will be most affected within the EU. The CBI estimates that 160,000 jobs will be lost when the new EU employment laws affecting temporary workers are implemented, again having been decided by qualified majority voting. At Maastricht, in 1992, Britain signed away its right to control its borders and immigration. Today's flood of immigrants creates a new city the size of Cambridge every 6 months. Under EU management, immigration in the UK is out of control, and that's a fact. In Britain, we can vote for slightly less than 14% of the people within the EU governmental structure making those laws. When the EU is enlarged, we shall be able to vote for slightly less than 10%. And all the people working within that structure, including the civil servants, bureaucrats, and the newly formed Euro Police, have a lifetime's immunity from prosecution for acts or deeds carried out while they work for the EU. Their offices, buildings, records and files cannot be seized, searched or entered. They are above the law. We have arrived at this perilous state of affairs only because British politicians have given away control of our lives to Brussels by signing 5 treaties. Just a few of the many areas of control that have been given away are shown on this historical list. Edward Heath signed the Treaty of Rome in 1972, giving the EU control of our farming and our fishing, as well as relinquishing our sovereignty to Brussels. In 1986, Margaret Thatcher signed the Single European Act, extending EU control into more than just trade and accepting increased qualified majority voting, which meant that Britain could no longer always say no to Brussels. John Major agreed to the Maastricht Treaty in 1992 and gave the EU the right to call us its citizens, to override our courts and laws, to control our transport systems, to break up our country into regions, and to create an EU army. In May 1999, Tony Blair signed the Consolidated Treaty in Amsterdam, allowing a European federal police force to have jurisdiction over us, giving Brussels the right to prevent freedom of speech, to stop the British government giving assistance to us, and to begin harmonising and introducing taxes in Britain. The Nice Treaty was signed in December 2000 by Blair, giving the EU the right to ban political parties, to introduce a federal prosecution service, to withhold our human rights, and to relinquish even more areas from the protection of the national veto. Over 3 decades, the EU, aided by Tory and Labour governments and successive elected parliaments, has relentlessly drained power away from the British nation, power that was not in the gift of the politicians to relinquish. And now the EU is creating a new constitution for itself, taking the last vestiges of sovereignty from us. But first, it needs several more powers in place. The regionalisation programme, which I've already mentioned, is one, and equally important is the European arrest warrant affecting extradition procedures. Here again, you decide whether this is an improvement to law enforcement or is something else taking place. Formerly, the extradition process in Britain worked like this. A warrant issued by a foreign magistrate or judge for the arrest of a person in Britain could only be executed in Britain if a British magistrate heard evidence implicating the suspect, confirmed the offence on the warrant was an offence in Britain, and was satisfied the warrant had been properly obtained. A British police officer could then arrest the suspect, who was still entitled to appeal against his arrest and deportation. This procedure, based on long-established British safeguards derived from Magna Carta and common law, was weakened by the 1989 Extradition Act, Britain's compliance with the European Convention on Extradition. EU and British politicians have highlighted the events of the 11th of September 2001 in America as a requirement for a speedier form of cross-border arrest to better deal with what they describe as international terrorism. The European arrest warrant, they say, meets this need. This is what it will mean. As before, a British citizen can be arrested in Britain for an offence committed in another country, but after that, the procedure will be entirely different. There will be no scrutiny by a British magistrate before the arrest. The offence on the warrant need not be an offence under British law. The arrested person need not see the warrant. The person making the arrest need not have the warrant. There need not be a warrant as long as the arresting officer believes that a warrant has been or will be issued. The arrest can be by an appropriate person, as yet undefined, not just a British police officer and probably a foreign or federal police officer. Of the 32 extraditable offences for which a warrant can be issued, only 2 refer to terrorism. 5 are not offences in this country. The warrant may also be used for all offences punishable with at least 12 months imprisonment, including conduct not illegal in Britain. 99% of the offences covered by the European arrest warrant have nothing at all to do with terrorism. For years, the Commission has been attempting to impose on Britain a continental system of justice known as corpus juris, which does not recognise habeas corpus or trial by jury. In 1999, the Lords Select Committee rejected corpus juris. Tony Blair has already accepted in principle the European arrest warrant and is now attempting to force its acceptance by our Parliament. Adoption of the European arrest warrant will destroy our British system with its unique safeguards for British people. Under the British Constitution, this is unlawful. Is the European arrest warrant a backdoor method of introducing into Britain an alien system of justice, or is it a genuine attempt to combat terrorism? One final point. Preparations by the EU to introduce a European arrest warrant began in 1999, around the time the Lords rejected Corpus Juris, and more than 2 years before the terrorist attacks of the 11th of September 2001. Corruption is rife in the European Union. The EU Court of Auditors, the body appointed in 1994 to ensure that the EU budget was being properly administered, have never signed off the accounts for any financial year since that date because of fraud and irregularity. In November 2002, the Court of Auditors admitted that of the £63 billion EU budget, it could only guarantee that 5% had been properly spent. This is not a surprise. In September 2002, an independent examination of EU accounting systems found that basic financial records are not being kept, double-entry bookkeeping is not the norm, advances are recorded as expenditure, which is fraudulent, and cash and bank balances are not being reconciled. The report concluded that no figures produced by the EU can be relied on in any respect. The EU accounting system itself is fraudulent. It can never comply with international or UK accounting systems, and it would prompt an immediate fraud prosecution in the UK. It is now widely recognised that the forthcoming EU constitution is a threat to Britain's sovereignty, and that the British people should decide in a referendum whether or not it should be ratified. The government dismissed such claims, stating that the constitution was merely a tidying up exercise. In fact, if ratified, the EU constitution means a seismic change in the relationship between the European Union and member states. Former French President Valéry Giscard d'Estaing was asked to find ways of simplifying the EU and making it more democratic, more transparent and more effective, but has taken this as a license to create a brand new constitution. There has been no consultation with the electorates. There is no provision for the people to give their views or vote on the proposals, or most importantly, to say whether or not they want such a constitution. No, most of this has been settled privately between politicians over quiet lunches, like the one Blair had with Giscard d'Estaing in February of 2003. The Times reported that the Prime Minister had conceded further abandonment of the national veto, and most, if not all, of the crucial changes now included in the final draft. All settled at a private lunch, without a single word uttered in Westminster, no consultation with the British electorate, and little or no public announcement at the time. The deceit continues. 4 months later, this grossly undemocratic process was completed, and the Convention published its final draft. They have created a constitution for a federal state, within which nations such as Britain become local states, provinces or regions. There are 59 articles in the Constitution. The relationship between the EU and the member states changes with this document. Total power will now reside in Brussels, where the bureaucrats can do more or less what they like. Here are just a few of the recommendations. Article 6 declares, "The Union shall have legal personality. The EU will be a sovereign state on the international stage and able to make binding agreements on Britain's behalf without consulting us. This huge transfer of power from Westminster to Brussels will create a new EU diplomatic and military capability under the control of EU appointees. For the first time, there will be a, quote, common EU foreign and security policy, covering all areas of foreign policy, including a common defence policy, which will lead to a common defence, close quote. This is another name for an EU army. There will be a Foreign Affairs Council and an appointed EU Foreign Minister. France and Germany have already recommended the German politician Joschka Fischer for this role. This means that the UK is to be neutered and will no longer have a distinct and separate voice on foreign affairs. Article 8 makes us all citizens of the Union, whether we want to be or not. This will be additional to national citizenship, not replacing it. But national citizenship is bound to disappear in time, as discrimination on the grounds of nationality is prohibited. This means that foreign nationals will be able to apply for employment in Britain and stand in British elections, even though they are of a different culture, have little experience of life in Britain, or are unable to speak the language. National citizenship, along with national identity, will wither and die. The Constitution proclaims that every citizen shall enjoy the rights and be subject to the duties provided for in this Constitution. Yet the duties of EU citizenship have never been revealed. Economic and monetary union is strengthened, giving the Union power to promote economic cohesion among member states and to coordinate their economic, employment and social policies. In addition, member states must coordinate their economic policies within the Union. Compliance with these articles will make it impossible for Britain to maintain an independent monetary policy. The UK will be forced to adopt the euro. Article 10 states that Union law shall have primacy over the law of member states. National parliaments will be able to make local laws only as the EU permits. Power is conferred on the Union by national governments, in our case Westminster. We are expected to hand over areas of governance or competence to the EU. The power of Brussels over our lives will then be almost total. Two more articles virtually make it so. Article 17 states that if action should prove necessary to attain one of the objectives set by this Constitution, and the Constitution has not provided the necessary power, the European Council shall take the appropriate measures. In other words, it can do what it likes. And Article 24 allows the European Council to introduce qualified majority voting, if it thinks fit, in areas now decided by unanimity. This means the end of the national veto. New EU governmental procedures and posts are being introduced. The European Council will now select a full-time president every 2.5 years. This is a new post. It means the present 6-monthly presidency held by each member state in turn is replaced by a bureaucrat secure in his post for at least 30 months. The European Council will select the President of the Commission, and the President of the Commission will then select 13 voting commissioners and 13 non-voting commissioners. This means that for 5 years out of 10, Britain will not have a voting commissioner. We will have even less influence than we do now over decisions directly affecting us. Articles 5 and 10 require Britain to take all appropriate measures to ensure the fulfilment of the obligations flowing from the Constitution, and refrain from any measure which could jeopardise the attainment of the objectives set out in the Constitution. These articles demand Britain's unqualified support for the future actions and conduct of the European Union, however unacceptable they might be. The EU Charter of Fundamental Rights is made binding in this Constitution. The Charter takes ownership of our rights. Robin Cook informed the House of Commons the Charter was of zero constitutional concern, and Keith Vaz, the former Minister for Europe, likened its significance to a copy of the Beano. In fact, the Charter will give the European Union power to interfere with and legislate on every aspect of our lives. Most of the rights in the Charter sound splendid, except that we already possess them all and more under our own Constitution. Written into the EU Charter, however, is the right of the European Union to impose limitations on our human rights, quote, if they are necessary and meet objectives recognised by the Union, close quote. We didn't have that limitation before, because we, the people of Britain, are sovereign. Our fundamental rights are not in the gift or at the discretion of a government. We in Britain acquire our human rights at the time of our birth, without interference from state or sovereign. They are ours as of right. The EU Constitution changes all that. In brief, agreeing to this Constitution is an acknowledgement that the power to govern Britain is vested in the European Union and not Westminster. The Constitution requires that it shall be ratified by member states in accordance with their respective constitutional requirements. This poses a serious problem for Britain. We already have a constitution that forbids a parliament from binding its successors. This EU constitution does precisely that, handing over the complete governance of this nation to a foreign power. What is being proposed is unconstitutional and is illegal. The Constitution marks the final transfer of power from the member states to the European Union, heralding the birth of a full-blown federal state and the death of the nation state. That which was secretly planned 30 years ago is about to happen. This is the end game. Where do the British political parties that have MPs or MEPs stand on the issue of the European Union? The Labour Party is totally committed to membership of the EU. The Liberal Democrat Party is similarly anxious that we should be part of a European federal state. The Conservative Party always has been and still is committed to Britain's membership. This is the party that by deceit took us into the EU and signed 3 of the 5 treaties. Amongst others, the Green Party supports Britain's continued membership. The United Kingdom Independence Party is committed to Britain's withdrawal from the EU. The forthcoming constitution highlights the problems now faced by the 4 pro-EU parties. In Europe, but not ruled by Europe, was always dishonest, and the EU constitution shows it up for the sham it was. No to the euro, but yes to the EU is now virtually impossible under the new constitution. We will renegotiate the treaties was and is deceitful. In the history of the EU, there is not one instance of power being returned to the member states. And anyway, how can you negotiate when you can't say no? Constitutionally and economically, is withdrawal from the EU, as advocated by the UK Independence Party, possible? Under our present constitution, it merely requires a bill passed in Parliament to repeal the 1972 European Communities Act, and Britain would regain its independence immediately. Economically, it is more than possible. Britain is the 4th largest economy in the world and would continue to trade with the EU after it left, in the same way as the rest of the world does. British jobs are dependent on trade with the EU, not on membership. As we have seen, however, the real cost of membership has been much greater than a monetary commitment. Our nation is about to disappear and become part of a federal state. We now face EU plans that by the summer of 2004 will destroy our legal system, our currency, our constitution, our way of life, our independence, and our parliament. If you are happy with this state of affairs, continue to support the Labour, Conservative, Liberal Democrat, Green and Nationalist parties. All of them will ensure that Britain remains in the EU and continues to be controlled by it. But it is not inevitable. You can stop this happening, you really can. Those who have brought this about have done so only by suppressing public debate on the EU. The media also have been gagged. You can change that now. Join a political party. Demand that your MP and MEP oppose the European arrest warrant and the Constitution. Vote against membership of the single currency. Oppose the regionalisation programme. Demand, at the very least, a British referendum on the ratification of the European Union Constitution. And get around that media ban by showing this video to as many people as possible. As Lord Stoddart said earlier, Britain is under a greater threat to its continuous right to self-government than at any time since 1940. We, the British, have never been asked if we want to join the European Union. For 30 years, we've been told that a federal European state was not being created, and now it's staring us in the face. For 30 years, we've been lied to. And for what? Disregard the political rhetoric about being at the heart of Europe or influencing Europe or the scores of other meaningless slogans. We Britons should ask ourselves this simple question. Are we prepared to give up our right to govern ourselves to stay in the European Union? Or is it too high a price to pay? If you think this price is too high, then there's still time for you to do something about it. But soon, very soon, there won't be. Get around that media ban by showing this video to as many people as possible.